Hey everyone, Paul Bertorelli for AvWeb. I don't do too many of these vlogs. I don't exactly consider myself a member of the YouTube clickbait outrage club, so I may be the only guy in the known universe not to have done a Trevor Jacob video. But a reader asked me to comment on the Red Bull airplane swap stunt, which went about 50% wrong over the weekend. So yeah, sure, I can flap my lips for a few minutes and maybe even make sense. If you're in aviation, you'll know Red Bull for the fabulous airplane stunts they've sponsored, like the wingsuit guys base jumping off a mountain into a passing airplane, the glider wing rider swap trick, and Dario Costa flying an Edge 540 through a tunnel in Turkey. These things are lavishly funded and planned, and even more lavishly shot in high-def video. And that was the case over the weekend when Andy Farrington and Luke Akins, who happen to be cousins, decided an airplane swap would make an entertaining gag for the bored masses. You may remember Luke Akins as the guy who jumped out of a caravan without a parachute and landed in a big net in the California desert in 2016. That one wasn't a Red Bull project for what it's worth, but it was exhaustively planned. The plane swap idea was that each would take off in his own aircraft, and once at altitude, they would exit and fly across to the other guy's airplane, recover it, and land it. Really pretty cool. Also an interesting technical challenge, because the only way you're going to get this to work is to have the airplanes in a loose formation vertical dive. The dive speed has to be on the fast side of a normal skydive fall rate, which is maybe 125 miles an hour. If the airplane is slower than that, you'd risk going low on it, as we say in skydiving, and you'd be screwed. There are two big technical problems. One, in a vertical dive, the airplane would soon reach VNE, or never exceed speed, which is about 200 miles per hour for a Cessna 182. You'd never catch it in free fall, and anyway, the wings would come off. Second, you need an autopilot to hold pitch, roll, and heading for that vertical dive. So the plane swap team's resident aeronautical engineer, Paolo Isco, solved the speed problem with a giant retractable air brake capable of generating 9 times the drag of the entire airplane. They also developed an autopilot to hold that vertical dive, which, as it turned out, had to be a little beyond the vertical. Really pretty creative engineering, actually. They appear to have tested all this stuff sufficient to make the attempt with more than 100 test flights, according to FAA documents. The skydiving is actually the relatively easy part. It's not trivial, but it's not too different from flying and docking on a big wave skydive, except for navigating that turbulence around the strut and wing and getting through the door. The engine is shut down, by the way, but it's windmilling for extra drag. Naturally, it's a hazard you have to avoid. From this clip, you can tell they got the dive speed pretty right, because when the skydiver exits, he just sort of floats right out at the same level. Personally, given the chance, I'd try that in a New York minute. So why did it go wrong with one of the airplanes crashing in the desert? It looks like rather than a stable vertical dive, one of the airplanes entered an inverted spin. You don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to imagine the center of pressure on that big speed brake maybe being sensitive to center of gravity. If they were able to actually test it with no one on board, they didn't mention it. Or maybe the autopilot servo failed, or something else unforeseen happened. We're not exactly certifying airliners here, after all. It was a hell of a good try, but no brass ring. Now for the rest of the story. There are certain regulatory sticking points here. One is this, CFR 91105, which required flight crew to be at his or her station during flight, and it's pretty clear that jumping out of the airplane, leaving it pilotless, doesn't meet that standard. Second, 9113 is the catch-all careless or reckless clause, which tends to be pretty broad. If your airplane ends up crumpled in the desert, you'll have some splaining to do. Where it gets tacky, though, is that according to the FAA, the plane swap project asked for waivers on 91105 about 60 days before the event. According to the FAA, they had originally argued that when it entered the dive, the airplane changed categories from an airplane to a controlled free-falling object. I don't think so. The FAA didn't either. Normally, a waiver is a big bureaucratic deal, but the FAA pushed it through quickly because PlaneSwap had made the media deal with Hulu for April 24th, which was last Sunday. The answer? Nothing doing. The FAA said the stunt had no public interest and no deal on the waivers. But Farrington and Akins went ahead anyway, so now some Red Bull lawyer may have to explain to an administrative law judge why that isn't willful violation of the regulations in the face of a waiver denial, or admit that it was and plead for mercy. I don't happen to agree that the stunt has no redeeming value because entertaining spectacles, which this was, are a welcome part of this dreary business we call life. And anyway, we've been doing this sort of stuff for years. Wing walking, bashing airplanes into barns, and even running trains together just to see what happens. 1974, Evel Knievel flew a rocket across the Snake River in Idaho and got about the same results as the PlaneSwap. I mean, come on, can't a guy have a little fun around here? They said the public interest was to promote STEM for students. That's science, technology, engineering, and math subjects. Okay, fair enough. But it reminds me of my favorite cable show, Mythbusters. They actually did demonstrate the science on that show, but it was really about blowing shit up. Same thing here. And by the way, Akins and Farrington, to their credit, appear to have taken every precaution not to endanger people on the ground. So I could argue that it wasn't really careless or reckless operation. A little jiggy maybe, but not insane. However, getting past the willful violation part is not so easy. We're operating here in Trevor Jacob world where someone will pull off a galactically stupid airplane stunt just for YouTube views. In case you forgot or never knew, Jacob jumped out of a Taylorcraft over California and expected the world to be gullible enough to believe it was a real emergency. The FAA wasn't, and it revoked his pilot certificate. Expecting them to wink and look the other way here when they sent a letter saying essentially don't do this, may be like expecting the tooth fairy to leave you gas money. It's essentially saying the regulations don't apply to me. If the waiver is denied, step back, take a breath, get a better argument, and try again. You might recall that in 2012, the Discovery Channel wanted to crash an old 727 for what they called an air safety project, but it was really just for the spectacle of, blowing shit up. Then as now, the FAA said no deal, so they moved the project to the Sonoran Desert in Mexico. I don't know, seems like that would have been a better idea here too. Much as I'm thrilled with Red Bull's extreme stunts, it's not a good look for them, for general aviation or skydiving, if you forge ahead when the FAA says no. You don't need to be an NTSB investigator to understand why this airplane crashed. The pilot left the premises. Skydiving lives in a quiet little backwater, almost unmolested by the FAA. Personally, I'd kind of like to keep it that way, so let's don't stir them up too much, okay? Anyway, that's my take. Thanks for watching.